Welcome to part 2 of side-by-side aero comparisons. If you haven't seen part 1, the link is in the description box below. In part 1, we saw Ducati and Aprilia. Next up, Yamaha. The big news in the Yamaha camp is the 2023 spec engine, which finally has the potential to match the likes of Ducatis, Aprilias and KTM's in a straight line. Yamaha also has a new chassis for 2023, but the big changes are once again in the aero department. So far, due to their lack of horsepower, Yamaha have had relatively smaller wings because if they put Ducati wings on their M1, they would lose even more top speed on the straights. But things are different this year and Yamaha engineers went all out on aero this time around. Once again, setting the baseline, let's look at what Yamaha's aero looked like in 2022. I'm marking the shape of the wings here and the tiny air intake. Now looking at the first iteration of the new aero, which we saw at the Valencia test last year, the connection points to the main fairing remains the same, but the wing itself is now bigger and has a straight edge to it. The side wing remains the same, but the air intake is massive on this version. For the sake of keeping track, let's call this V1. Over the winter, Yamaha engineers went all out on the shape and size of the wings, and in Malaysia, we saw the V2 of the front wings. This set looks very similar to the 2022 wings, but the rear of the wing is where we see the variation. Also, the big air intake makes an appearance, meaning it might be here to stay. At Portimao, Yamaha brought the V3 of their aero concept. This one is similar to the V1 concept from Valencia, but instead of wings going back and down to connect back to the fairing, in this one, the wing goes upwards. The chunky air intake is starting to look a lot more final, as all the M1 seen at Portimao had it on them. Fabio Quartararo ran this version of the aero for the most part and even set his fastest time with it. So it seems like this is what the Yamaha is going to look like, at least for the start of the season. And just when we thought that's all from Yamaha, they too brought out a radical new aero on the very last day. The main wing seems to be very similar to the V1, which we first saw at Valencia, but instead of the usual side wings, the M1 had two new sets of wings and a downwash duct to complete the concept. Given that this came out only on one bike and only on the last day, suggests that this might be an experiment Yamaha were conducting for the future. And putting the cherry on the cake of absurd aero, Fabio Quartararo showed off Yamaha's F1-inspired rear wing, which is so hideous that even their engineers hoped it wouldn't work. Moving on to KTM. With a very different sounding new engine, KTM stuck to their new approach of refining what they have, rather than bringing trucks full of new parts. KTM had two versions of the chassis, one of which according to Brad Binder was good in corners, while the other once was good under braking. When it comes to aero, KTM seemed to have followed Aprilia and gone all out on the ground effect concept. In order to set the baseline, let's first look at the 2022 RC16. Typical KTM front wings, which they've had for over a season now, another set of wings on the side and a couple of slits to let the air out and keep the engine cool. Pretty standard stuff. Looking at the 2023 bike, the wings remain the same, however, the bottom half of the fairing is all about ground effect now. Plain, simple and effective. Looking at the same version from another angle, here's your ground effect edge, and the bottom half, plain and smooth like last year's Aprilia. In another variation, KTM's bottom fairing also had the sharp edge running through the bottom part of the fairing. And since both Aprilia and KTM revealed this change at the same test, it would appear that both sides came up with the same design, independently on their own. All through the post-2022 season's test, the shakedown test and the two pre-season tests, we have seen bikes from almost all manufacturers, with either the ground effect fairing or the downwash ducts. But KTM are the only ones to have a concept featuring both. In this version, which seems to be the favorite of all four RC16 riders, there is the ground effect edge near the side wing, and at the very bottom, they have the downwash duct as well. There are still rumors that Red Bull Advanced Engineering have developed this concept, but so far, there has been no confirmation from KTM. And at the bottom of the pack, Honda. At the Honda factory, these are truly desperate times. The most successful team in the history of the sport has been setting all the wrong records in the past few seasons. Honda brought so many new parts that it is almost impossible to keep track of them. So for the scope of this video, I've only covered the updates which are either almost finalized or are concepts for the future. Once again, let's start by looking at the base RC213V from 2022. A very distinctly shaped front wing and a relatively smooth side, with few slits for airflow. Now comparing with the 2023 RC213V, which seemed like the most final version, we can see that the wings are a completely different design. More on these wings in a bit. At the bottom, there is Honda's version of downwash ducts and carbon inserts in the chassis to keep the rear more stiff. Onto the other aero concepts, the one on the left features 2023 design wings compared to the right, which has wings from 2021. On the left is the almost finalized, downwash duct design, and on the right is Honda's version of ground effect, which, looking at the angle of the edge, seems to be a very mild version. The shape of the fairing at the top is also something Honda played around with, a lot. The one on the right side seems to be the preferred design, as that's what we saw all 4 Hondas run on the very last day of the test. On the last day, Stefan Bradl was seen running another variation of the AERO, in which the bottom half looked very similar to the 2022 bike with a very aggressive downwash duct-looking piece attached. If this is actually a downwash duct, it might cause too much drag because of the steep angle. However, since only Stefan Bradl gave this version a go, indicates that this must be a test for something in the future. Now let's talk about the new wings on the Honda and where they might have come from. So here is a picture of a 2022 Honda alongside a 2022 Aprilia. Notice how the wings are shaped differently. And here is a picture of 2023 Honda alongside the same 2022 Aprilia. Definitely not a coincidence, right? That's all for this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and consider subscribing if you aren't already subscribed.